The chef guarded his recipe like treasure until someone killed for it. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing this community grow. Your comments always make these mysteries come alive. Let's dive in. I'll say this for Mr. Wolfe. When his domestic routine is disturbed, it's not the kind of thing that just happens. It's an event. A cat walking across the rug could qualify as a crisis if its paws carried dirt from the garden. But that Thursday afternoon, the disturbance had nothing to do with a cat, dirt, or any of the usual interruptions that drive Wolfe from mild annoyance to biblical wrath. It started with the smell. Not Fritz's doing, mind you. Fritz Brenner, our resident culinary saint, was in the kitchen working on a duck terrine worthy of a royal pardon. The aroma wafting in from there was perfection itself. The other smell, the foreign one, drifted through the front door just after I'd opened it to a man who looked like a good night's sleep had been a luxury since the Great Depression. He was thin, sharp-nosed, with the restless hands of someone who never let his thoughts catch up to his nerves. His suit was expensive, but tired, and his eyes carried that blend of calculation and fear that I've come to recognize as a business opportunity. "My name's Lucien de Soto," he said. His voice had the clipped tone of a chef used to giving orders to lesser mortals. "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe, immediately." "Congratulations," I told him. "That's the first step. The second is convincing him you're worth the effort. Come in." He hesitated, as if expecting the brownstone to swallow him whole. When he finally crossed the threshold, I could swear Fritz's nose twitched from the kitchen the way a violinist reacts to a sour note. The smell was the problem, some kind of burnt saffron and vinegar concoction clinging to De Soto's coat. It didn't just enter the house, it declared war on it. "Wait here," I said, heading to the office to prepare Wolfe for the invasion. Inside, Wolfe was parked in his yellow chair like a Roman emperor, waiting for the Senate to explain itself. The orchids were in their usual pristine state. The world outside was a nuisance, and his book on the table bore the title On Gastronomy and the Intellect, which was the sort of thing Wolfe read for fun. "Archie," he said without looking up, "I detect agitation in your step. Has the world committed another outrage?" "Depends," I said. "Would you count the arrival of a famous chef in distress as an outrage?" He looked up then, eyes narrowing. "Famous? Lucien de Soto runs Le Signe d'Or, 3 Michelin stars, rumored to have invented a sauce that made a food critic weep. He's in our front room, smelling like a kitchen fire." Wolfe groaned, a deep operatic sound that meant the sanctity of the brownstone was about to take a hit. "Pfui. Bring him in, if you must. But if that smell contaminates my air, you'll answer for it." When I ushered De Soto in, Wolfe's eyes flicked over him once, like a judge assessing a man already halfway to the gallows. "Mr. Wolfe," De Soto began, "I wouldn't have come here if I had any other choice. Someone has stolen my recipe." Wolfe's eyebrow lifted a millimeter. "You are a cook, I presume?" "A chef," De Soto said, bristling. "And not just any recipe, the Sing sauce. It's my creation, the soul of my restaurant. Without it, I'm finished." I glanced at Wolfe. Normally, culinary theft wouldn't rank high on his scale of interests, unless it involved Fritz or his own dinner menu. But Wolfe's gaze had sharpened, ever so slightly. "Indeed," he said. "And why, Mr. De Soto, do you imagine a recipe, your recipe, merits my attention?" De Soto hesitated. His fingers twitched against his coat, because whoever took it didn't just steal from me. They left something behind, a warning, and they knew my private habits too well. He reached into his pocket and produced a small envelope, yellowed and faintly smudged with oil. Inside was a single scrap of parchment on which a neat hand had written 3 words, "The flame remembers." Wolfe's eyes closed for a moment, and when he opened them, they gleamed with interest. "Archie," he said quietly, Have Fritz bring coffee. This gentleman may have, quite by accident, brought me something resembling a problem. Fritz brought the coffee with the caution of a man approaching a bomb. He placed the tray on Wolfe's desk, gave De Soto one withering look, half priest, half executioner, and retreated in silence. The faintest sniff of disapproval lingered behind him like a sermon unsaid. Wolfe lifted his cup, inhaled, and gave a brief grunt that could have meant either acceptance or despair. "You say your recipe has been stolen," he said, fixing De Soto with a gaze that could sear meat. "From where, precisely?" "My office," De Soto replied, clasping his hands tightly. "At the restaurant. I keep my original notes there, in a locked drawer. Only 3 people have keys. Myself, my sous-chef, and my manager." "Names," Wolfe said. "Henri Valette, my sous-chef, with me for 8 years. Lydia Crane, the business manager. She's handled every financial matter since we opened. Both loyal, or so I believed." Wolfe's fingers steepled. "You believe either of them took it?" No," De Soto said, then faltered. "Not exactly. It's complicated." "Complication," Wolfe murmured, "is the refuge of those who resist precision. Speak plainly." De Soto's voice dropped a note. "I had a visitor 2 nights ago, after closing. A man who called himself Vincent Hale. Claimed he represented a private collector in Paris who buys culinary intellectual property. He offered me $50,000 for exclusive rights to the scene sauce recipe. Refused, of course. But later that night I found my office unlocked, the drawer forced, the recipe gone, and that note, the flame remembers, was left in its place." Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. "Archie." "Yeah? You recall our conversation last spring with the patent attorney about intangible property theft?" "Sure, the one where you said lawyers who work on food patents are Philistines with fountain pens." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Yet even Philistines may find this case stimulating. Continue, Mr. De Soto." De Soto leaned forward, the nervous tension in him like a coiled wire. "I confronted both Henri and Lydia. They swore ignorance. Henri even threatened to quit, said my distrust insulted him. Lydia tried to calm me down, but yesterday morning, a food critic, Jonathan Laird, called the restaurant to say he'd received an anonymous letter hinting that our sacred sauce would be revealed to the public within a week. That," Wolfe said, "is an inducement to panic." "Yes. I thought, perhaps it's blackmail, or sabotage. Someone wants to destroy me. Or," Wolfe said softly, "someone wants you to destroy yourself." There was a silence then, thick enough to cut with Fritz's carving knife. I watched De Soto's face tighten and pale. He was realizing something, though whether it was guilt, fear, or comprehension, I couldn't tell. Finally, Wolfe pushed his chair back an inch, a sign the conversation was advancing from annoyance to investment. "Archie, see that Mr. De Soto is comfortable in the front room. Then bring me the telephone." I escorted De Soto out, left him to meditate over the Persian rug, and brought the phone back. Wolfe was already scribbling something on a pad. "I will speak to Mr. Panzer," he said. "We require discretion, surveillance, and an agile mind. Saul will begin at Le Signe d'Or." "You're putting Saul on this already?" I asked. "We don't even know what's been stolen, outside of some sauce scribbles." "Phooey," you heard the man. "He was visited by an alleged intermediary with an offer. Then his intellectual treasure was taken. You, Archie, will accompany De Soto to the restaurant tonight. See the scene. Verify his account. Observe the people. You are not to taste anything." Thanks for the culinary warning. Wolfe's eyes closed in irritation. If the recipe has been compromised, the thief may seek to reproduce it. Taste, Mr. Goodwin, is evidence. We do not contaminate evidence. By the time De Soto finished his second coffee and Wolfe dismissed him with a curt nod, the rhythm of the house was off. Even the orchids in the next room seemed tense, their quiet discipline disturbed by human nonsense. I walked our guest to the door. He thanked me, though the words sounded like a habit, not sincerity. "Tell Mr. Wolfe I'm grateful," he said. "And if you find the person who did this, please be careful. They're not ordinary." "Neither are we," I said, and saw him out. When I came back, Wolfe was already dictating a note to Saul, his tone clipped, efficient. "Observation begins at 10. Primary subjects, Henri Valette and Lydia Crane. Supplementary, this Vincent Hale, if such a person exists. Secondary, Jonathan Laird, the critic. Compile their recent contacts, communications, and movements." He paused. "And Archie, before you leave, consult Fritz. He may have insight into what manner of mind would violate a kitchen for profit." I grinned. That'll be a cheerful chat. Fritz was in the kitchen, cleaning copper pots with the dedication of a man polishing a crown. When I relayed Wolfe's request, he snorted. "A thief of recipes," he said darkly, "is worse than a thief of jewels. A jewel you can buy again, but a recipe, no. A recipe is a soul." "Then you and De Soto are spiritual brothers," I told him. "Ha! The man cooks with saffron like a painter with mud. Still, such theft is sacrilege. Tell Mr. Wolfe the thief will not cook long before being burned." When I returned upstairs, Wolfe was leaning back, eyes half closed, a faint smile under the weight of thought. "Fritz," he murmured, "understands what Mr. De Soto does not, that the violation of creation is not material, but moral." "That's deep," I said. "But if it's all the same to you, I'll focus on the part where we catch the culprit." He waved a hand. "Your shallower ambitions have their uses. Go, Archie. Look, listen, and do not presume." I left the brownstone at dusk with De Soto beside me in the cab, watching the city slide past like a series of dimly lit kitchens, each with its own secret heat. The man was wound tight, his fingers drumming against his knee, his eyes darting to every reflection in the window. When we reached Le Cygne d'Or, it was after 10. The restaurant, closed to customers, glowed faintly through the glass, its tables bare, its chandeliers glinting like captured stars. Inside, the scent of spice and steel hung thick in the air. Henri Valette was there, big as a butcher, arms crossed, his face a landscape of suspicion. "You brought a detective," he growled. "I brought an assistant," De Soto said sharply. "Mr. Goodwin is here to see the office." Lydia Crane entered then, a cool, slender woman in her 30s with the eyes of someone who'd long ago learned to count before trusting. She greeted me with a handshake like a question mark. "We've told him everything we know," she said to De Soto. "You're making this worse." "Someone stole from me," he snapped. "From us. And dragging detectives through the kitchen at midnight will help?" Their words hit the tile like cleavers. I let them bicker while I examined the office. The drawer had indeed been forced. Clean job, no splintering. Whoever did it knew locks or had a key. The place smelled faintly of smoke and something else. Not quite food, not quite chemical. I noticed an empty envelope in the wastebasket, identical to the one De Soto had brought Wolfe. Inside, a trace of oil, the same smudge pattern. 2 notes, or one replaced? Before I could ask, the kitchen door creaked. Henri appeared in the doorway, eyes narrow. "You find what you're looking for, detective?" "Not yet," I said, "but I found something I wasn't." "What's that?" "The sense that this isn't just about cooking." Behind me, Lydia drew a slow breath. De Soto's jaw clenched, and for a moment the whole room felt charged, as if someone had turned up the heat under an invisible pan. That was when the light flickered. Once, then again, and from the corridor outside came the faint sound of a door closing. Not a slam, a whisper, controlled, intentional. When I stepped into the hallway, it was empty. but the air carried a trace of burnt saffron, the same smell that had followed De Soto into the brownstone. Whoever had taken that recipe had just paid the restaurant another visit, and this time they were close enough to touch. I stood in the corridor for a long second, letting my eyes adjust and my brain catch up. The faint trace of burnt saffron still hung in the air, like a calling card for a ghost with culinary ambitions. The sound of the door had come from the back hallway, leading to the delivery entrance. I moved quickly and quietly, the way Wolfe insists I never do when I'm following someone. "You are not a panther, Archie. You are an observant man," he says. But sometimes panther beats philosopher. The back door was ajar, just enough to let in a sliver of cold air. Outside, the alley behind Le Signor was deserted, slick with rain, littered with broken crates and the perfume of yesterday's fish delivery. I stepped out, scanning left and right. A few cars passed on the street beyond, but no one lingered. Still that smell, burnt saffron, metallic, slightly bitter, was stronger here, caught in the air like smoke that had no source. "Archie?" De Soto's voice cut through the darkness behind me. "What's going on?" I turned. "You tell me. Someone just left your restaurant through this door." He froze, his face draining of color. "That's impossible. The alarm didn't sound," I said. "Either it's broken, or someone knows how to silence it." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "God help me. This is getting worse than I thought." "Worse for you, maybe," I said, "but better for my expense account. Let's lock this up before our visitor decides to make another appearance." When we returned to the kitchen, Henri and Lydia were waiting. The scene could have been a tableau from a bad opera. Henri glowering, Lydia perfectly still, and De Soto pale as frosting. "Someone's been here again," I said. Door in the back was open, smelled like burnt saffron. "Ring a bell for anyone." Henri's eyes darted toward the spice rack before he could stop himself. I caught it. So did Lydia. "There's no saffron missing," Henri barked, defensive before I'd even asked. "We keep it locked with the truffles. Costs more than gold these days." "Then maybe our thief prefers symbolism to seasoning," I said, "but he's using it for something." Lydia folded her arms. "You're suggesting this is personal." "I'm suggesting it's theatrical," I said, "and people who stage scenes usually want an audience." De Soto's voice came low and hoarse. "Then they'll get one. Wolfe will find them." That, I thought, was the first sensible thing he'd said all night. We left the restaurant close to midnight. As I rode home, I could feel the pieces shifting in my head. Too many directions, not enough edges to connect them. Wolfe would have to sort them as usual. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the lights were still on in the office. That meant he'd been thinking. When Nero Wolfe thinks, it's not a pastime, it's an occupation. He didn't look up when I entered, just gestured toward the desk where the remains of his midnight snack waited. "Report," he said. I told him everything. The break-in, the saffron scent, the reaction of De Soto and his people, and the mysterious note twin I'd found in the wastebasket. He listened without interruption, his eyes closed, fingers steepled, occasionally twitching at some detail like a cat's ear catching the flutter of a moth. When I finished, he opened his eyes. A recurrence of the odor, identical to the one accompanying Mr. De Soto. That is suggestive. Suggestive of what? That the thief is not merely imitating a flavor, Wolfe said, but invoking it. I frowned. "You're losing me," he sighed. "Archie, must I remind you that cuisine, like any art, carries its own iconography? Saffron, rarity, heat, transformation. The flame remembers, a cryptic signature. Our intruder has a sense of irony." "Wonderful," I said. "We've got ourselves a poetic criminal. That narrows it down to about half of Manhattan." He ignored that. "Did you examine the locks?" "Clean job. Could have been a master key or a pick. No scratches." Then this is not an act of clumsy theft, Wolfe said. It is precise, planned, and the duplication of the note implies deliberation. The thief left one for De Soto to find, and one as a trace to confirm his reach. This is not impulsive. He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Saul reports that Lydia Crane and Henri Valette are both at home. No activity since dusk, yet the restaurant was entered tonight. That suggests either a third party or a false trail. I poured myself a drink. Or one of them's got a partner who does the dirty work. Perhaps, he murmured. But you said the smell was present when Mr. De Soto arrived here, yes? Right. Then he too carried it. You think he's in on it? I think, Wolfe said slowly, that he is involved more deeply than he dares admit. Whether as victim or collaborator remains to be seen. That was as far as he would go. When Wolfe starts his speculative mode, interrupting him is like throwing snowballs at a furnace. You get melted down fast. Tomorrow, he said finally, you will visit Mr. Jonathan Laird, the critic. His anonymous letter may have been bait or warning. We must learn which. Any particular line you want me to take? Be yourself, he said. That is sufficiently disarming. The next morning, I found Laird at his usual haunt, a small cafe in Greenwich Village that served coffee strong enough to make a banker philosophical. He was in his 40s, plump, meticulous, with the expression of a man who knows how to ruin reputations in 10 words or less. Mr. Goodwin, he said after I introduced myself. I was wondering when Wolfe would send someone. De Soto must be desperate. Desperate enough, I said. Tell me about this anonymous letter you received. He pulled a folded sheet from his notebook. Typed, no signature. Postmarked Manhattan. It read, The Flame remembers. Watch for the unveiling of truth at the Cine. Same phrase, I said. Yes. I thought it a publicity stunt, frankly. De Soto has always loved drama. You're saying he'd stage his own theft? Laird shrugged. Publicity a stranger bedfellows than art. His restaurant's been slipping. Last season's menu disappointed. Investors restless. What better way to make headlines than a scandal about a stolen recipe? It had the sour ring of possibility. When I got back to the brownstone and laid it out, Wolfe didn't look surprised. Laird is a cynic, he said, but cynics often stumble into truth by accident. However, such theatre would require an accomplice capable of intrusion, subterfuge, and timing. And a good nose for saffron, I added. Indeed. He closed his eyes. You will invite Mr. De Soto here tomorrow evening at 7. He is to bring both his associates, Valette and Miss Crane. I shall require their presence for comparative observation. Sounds like the beginning of one of your inquests. It is an overture, Wolfe said. The melody will come later. That night, the brownstone felt different again, expectant, like a stage between acts. Fritz was quiet at dinner, his disapproval of culinary desecration still simmering. I left him to his stews and sauces and went up to my room, trying to piece the day together. De Soto's fear didn't feel rehearsed. Lydia's calm was too controlled. Henry's defensiveness, too quick. And that faint smell of burnt saffron still lingered in my jacket, no matter how many times I aired it. When I finally turned in, I couldn't shake the sense that Wolfe had already seen something the rest of us hadn't, and that whoever had written "The Flame Remembers" wasn't done burning yet. The next evening came down like a curtain on a stage that knew its play would end badly for someone. The air outside was thick with that early autumn dampness that makes the city smell like old stone and cold metal. Inside the brownstone, though, all was precise and deliberate. The air carried the faint scent of orchids and coffee, Wolfe's preferred atmosphere for ambushes. I was in the office arranging chairs for our guests. Wolfe didn't need to say how he wanted it done. The setup never changed, his desk squarely at the head of the room like an altar, his massive chair facing the door. My place, on the side, notebook ready, mouth sharper than my pencil. The 3 guest chairs, perfectly spaced in front, were the seats of judgment. Fritz had been banished from the kitchen temporarily, so as not to hear anything that might offend his culinary conscience. At 6:30 sharp, Wolfe was in position, wearing a brown suit that looked carved from tree bark, his eyes heavy-lidded but alert. He'd been reading all afternoon, something on the psychology of deceit, I guessed, judging by the small smirk that had been simmering since lunch. "Archie," he said as I adjusted the lamp, "be certain that coffee is ready at the precise moment they arrive. A nervous guest deprived of comfort is a defensive one. I prefer them pliable." "Got it. You want cream and sugar diplomacy on standby." "Spare me your vernacular." At 7 on the dot, the bell rang. I opened the door to find Lucien de Soto looking worse for wear. His eyes had the feverish brightness of a man whose sleep had been trampled by worry. Behind him came Lydia Crane, crisp and immaculate in a charcoal suit, her poise bordering on chilly. Henry Valette brought up the rear, massive and brooding, the kind of man who'd rather wrestle the problem than discuss it. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting you," I said, ushering them in. The moment they entered, Wolfe's eyes flicked over them, a brief cataloguing of expression, posture, and tension. He didn't bother with small talk. "Please be seated," he said, his voice even and resonant. "We have a matter to clarify." De Soto's hands trembled slightly as he sat. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't know what you've discovered, but—" "Nothing," Wolfe interrupted, "that could not yet be denied. However, we shall attempt to refine our ignorance. Archie, if you please. The notes." I opened my pad. Ready. Wolfe leaned back. "Mr. De Soto," he began, "your recipe was stolen. Subsequently, someone entered your premises a second time. You have accused no one explicitly, yet your demeanor suggests suspicion. Whom do you distrust most?" De Soto hesitated, glancing between Lydia and Henri. I don't know. I wish I did." "You do," Wolfe said sharply. "You merely fear to name it." Henri's jaw set. "If you think I took it, you're out of your mind. I've spent years making that kitchen run, like clockwork." Lydia's voice came cool and controlled. "No one said you did, Henri, but it's fair to wonder who had the opportunity." "Opportunity?" Henri barked. "You handle the books. You've got keys to everything, even my spice rack." "Enough," Wolfe said quietly. The single word flattened the air like a hammer. "Each of you will answer my questions in turn. Archie, take notes verbatim." He turned his gaze to Lydia. "Miss Crane, do you recall the exact time you left the restaurant on the night of the first incident?" 10:45, she said promptly. "Henri and I closed up together. Lucien stayed a few minutes after we left." Wolfe's eyebrows twitched. "Ah, and Mr. De Soto, you confirmed the break-in at what hour?" "Just before midnight." "So the interval is less than 75 minutes, Wolfe murmured. "And Miss Crane, you possess a key to the office?" "Yes, but it never left my purse." "I see. Mr. Valette?" "I have mine at the restaurant, locked in my locker," Henri said, his tone clipped. "Convenient, yet insecure," Wolfe observed. "And this Mr. Vincent Hale, our elusive intermediary, has not been heard from since his initial visit?" De Soto shook his head. "No, his number disconnected. His address, fake." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "A phantom, then? Or a mask?" The tension in the room was thick enough to slice. I could feel Lydia's composure beginning to fray, Henri's anger simmering like a pot about to boil, and De Soto shrinking under the weight of his own guilt or fear, or both. Wolfe leaned back further, folding his hands. "Someone here lies," he said. "Whether by omission or invention, I have not yet decided. But lies, like sauces, have their aroma, and I am beginning to detect the flavor." He turned to me. "Archie, tomorrow you will visit Le Signe d'Or again. Observe the kitchen operation. I wish to know what remains missing, beyond the recipe itself. De Soto frowned. You think something else was taken? I think, Wolfe said, that theft rarely confines itself to one object when the opportunity allows. If I am wrong, I will apologize to the heir. The meeting ended on that note. They left quietly, though Henry managed to mutter something about fat men with theories on his way out. I didn't take it personally. Wolfe had trained me to appreciate rudeness as a form of confession. When the door closed, I turned to Wolfe. You've got something, haven't you? He exhaled through his nose. Something, yes. Not enough to satisfy reason, but sufficient to intrigue it. Our thief, or our deceiver, is cultivating symbols. The repetition of the saffron scent, the phrase, "the flame remembers," these are not random affectations. They are part of a design. A design that means what? That, Wolfe said, is what you are to discover tomorrow. Pay attention to sensory elements. Smells, residues, misplaced ingredients. And Archie, be careful with Miss Crane. Her control is admirable, but her restraint conceals something combustible. I left it at that. The next morning, I headed back to Le Cygne d'Or, where the city was already awake and impatient. The restaurant was closed to customers, but alive with staff prepping for lunch service. Henry was there, sleeves rolled, directing the kitchen with military precision. Mr. Goodwin, he grunted, not pleased to see me. You're back. Just checking in, I said easily. Think of me as the health inspector for secrets. He didn't smile. I watched the staff at work, each station organized, gleaming, but there was tension under the rhythm. Cooks worked too fast, avoided eye contact, the kind of fear that comes when a boss suspects everyone. I drifted toward the spice cabinet, where Henry kept his private stock. The lock was new, recently replaced. Change the locks often? I asked. Only when someone's been careless, he said, chopping onions like they owed him money. Someone meaning who? He looked up then, eyes sharp. Meaning I don't know, but it wasn't me. In De Soto's office, I noticed the desk had been moved an inch closer to the wall since my last visit. Small detail maybe, but Wolfe had trained me to notice the geometry of guilt. I crouched, ran a hand along the baseboard, and found a charred scrap of paper wedged behind it. It was part of a handwritten recipe. The ink was smudged, but the handwriting was firm and looping, different from the sample De Soto had shown Wolfe the day before. I slid it into my pocket, heart kicking once. When I stood, Lydia was in the doorway watching. Curiosity is a dangerous hobby, Mr. Goodwin, she said softly. I've got worse ones, I told her. This one pays the rent. She smiled faintly. Lucien's frightened, but not of losing a recipe, of losing face. That sauce isn't just a dish, it's his story. Without it, he's just another man with a restaurant and a temper. And what's your story, Miss Crane? My story, she said, stepping closer, is that loyalty has an expiration date. Then she turned and walked away, before I could ask what she meant. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room, communing with his orchids. I handed him the burned fragment. He studied it through half-lidded eyes. This is not De Soto's hand, he said, nor is it Hale's invention. Someone attempted to replicate the recipe and failed. Hence the burning. A rehearsal, Archie. Our thief practices their art. Meaning? Meaning they intend to use the recipe, not sell it, Wolfe said grimly. And that, my dear Archie, narrows the field. Theft for profit is crude. Theft for pride, that is human. He leaned back, gaze distant. Summon them all again tomorrow evening. I believe the flame is ready to remember. When Wolfe says, summon them all, it's not a request. It's the judicial equivalent of thunder. The next day, I spent my morning on the phone confirming that De Soto, Lydia, and Henri would show up again that evening. Henri grumbled. Lydia was calm to the point of being suspicious, and De Soto sounded as if he'd spent the night trapped in a blender of guilt and caffeine. I didn't bother asking if they'd be on time. They would. People always are when Wolfe calls court. By 5, the brownstone had the stillness of a waiting trap. Fritz, who'd been keeping one ear open since the case began, refused to leave the kitchen, claiming he had sauces that needed attention. That was Fritz for you. He could braise a duck and eavesdrop with equal precision. I was in the office, preparing the notepads and clearing the ashtray Wolfe never used, but insisted remain there for symmetry. The orchid room door was cracked just enough for the scent to bleed through, mixing faintly with coffee in anticipation. At 6:30, Wolfe emerged from the plant room, wiping his hands as though he'd just finished gardening in someone's conscience. He settled into his chair, immovable and serene, the embodiment of confidence that didn't need to pace. "Archie," he said, "have you informed Saul of our meeting?" "Yeah," I said. "He's posted nearby in case one of our guests decides to make a dramatic exit." "Excellent. The human impulse to flee is a confession without words." At exactly 7, the bell rang. The 3 of them entered like characters who had read the wrong ending to their own play. De Soto looked as if his shirt collar were choking him. Lydia was still smooth and composed, but her eyes were sharper now, alert, measuring. Henry walked in last, his heavy steps deliberate, his arms crossed as if he were daring Wolfe to accuse him. Wolfe inclined his head. "Good evening. Please sit. I trust your consciences have been properly aired since last night." No one replied. That silence was almost orchestral. Wolfe folded his hands on the desk. "You were all present during the events that led to the disappearance of Mr. De Soto's recipe. You all claim ignorance, yet the facts insist that someone among you engineered not only a theft, but a performance." De Soto's brow furrowed. "Performance?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "A series of deliberate cues, the phrase, 'the flame remembers,' the repetition of saffron, the second intrusion. Such flourishes belong not to a thief seeking money, but to a dramatist seeking meaning." He turned his gaze on Lydia. "Miss Crane, you spoke yesterday of loyalty having an expiration date. Would you elaborate?" Lydia's chin lifted slightly. "I meant that people change. When you invest years into someone's dream and find your own ambitions ignored, loyalty becomes a form of self-betrayal." "Poetic," Wolfe said, "and applicable. You manage the finances, yes? You understand how reputation translates into survival. Yes. Then you also understand what happens when a celebrated chef loses his signature. He becomes replaceable." Her lips tightened, but she didn't answer. Wolfe shifted his attention to Henri. "Mr. Valette, you replaced the office lock recently." Henri's eyes flared. "I did, because someone had been tampering with it." "Indeed. And did you mention this to your employer?" "I told Lydia. She said she'd handle it." Lydia's head snapped toward him. "That's not true. I told you to inform Lucien directly." They glared at each other, and for the first time Wolfe smiled faintly. "Ah, divergence. The thief among you depends upon the cracks between your recollections." He motioned toward me. "Archie, if you please. The fragment you discovered yesterday." I handed it over. Wolfe held it between his fingers delicately, as though it were an insect wing. "This," he said, "was found behind the baseboard of Mr. De Soto's office, a piece of the stolen recipe, partially burned. The handwriting is not De Soto's. Observe the curvature of the S, the slant of the R. Miss Crane, this is your hand." Lydia's face froze. For a second, she said nothing, then laughed softly. "I wrote it down from dictation. Lucien asked me to copy it for him weeks ago." De Soto blinked. "I never—" "Yes, you did," she said sharply. "You'd been testing a variation and wanted a clean draft. I still have the copy in the accounting ledger." De Soto's confusion looked too raw to be staged. "If you still have it, Why didn't you tell me? Because you accused us before I had the chance, she snapped. And I thought perhaps you didn't want anyone to know you'd been revising it. Henry gave a grunt. So the big secret source wasn't so sacred after all. Silence, Wolfe said firmly. This exchange reveals motive, but not method. The question remains, who entered the restaurant twice, left notes, and sought to humiliate rather than profit? He leaned back, eyes half closed. The key lies in the phrase, "the flame remembers." It is not random. It references something intimate, shared. De Soto swallowed hard. My first restaurant, he murmured. Before Le Signador. It was called La Flamme. It burned down. Accident? Wolfe asked. De Soto hesitated. That's what the report said. Grease fire. But there were rumors. It started in the kitchen. I fired a sous chef the day before. Claimed he was careless, stealing supplies. Henri's chair scraped loudly. You mean Philippe? Yes, De Soto said. He vanished after that. I haven't seen him in years. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Then perhaps you have. Or rather, perhaps he has seen you. A long silence followed. The ticking of the clock filled it like suspense stretching on a wire. You think Philippe is behind this? De Soto asked finally. I think, Wolfe said, that Philippe may no longer exist as Philippe. The visit from Vincent Hale, a man with no address, disconnected number, and an improbable offer. That was your ghost returning in a new guise. Lydia whispered. Revenge. Yes, Wolfe said. A chef wronged, discarded, perhaps blamed unjustly for the fire that destroyed La Flamme. He rebuilds himself, watches your rise, and chooses the moment to strike. The stolen recipe, the notes, the saffron scent, symbolic of the old flame, literal and figurative. Henry frowned. But how could he get in? We never saw him. Because he had help, Wolfe said quietly. His gaze turned to Lydia again. You, Miss Crane, provided the schedule. Perhaps unknowingly, perhaps not. You handled the hiring correspondence, the delivery orders, the schedules, all accessible to someone charming enough to earn your confidence. Her face went pale. He called once, she said slowly. Said he was a supplier, needed to confirm delivery times for saffron. I gave him our hours, that's all. Wolfe nodded. It was enough. He knew when the restaurant would be empty, when to strike. But his purpose wasn't theft. It was remembrance. To recreate his lost creation in your kitchen and leave his mark behind. The flame indeed remembers. De Soto looked stricken, his pride collapsing into something smaller. My God, all this for revenge. Revenge is the most meticulous art, Wolfe said, and the most ruinous. It appeals to those who cannot cook with forgiveness. He glanced at me. Archie, you will telephone Mr. Panzer, have him deliver the information I requested. 5 minutes later, Saul arrived with a manila folder. Inside were photographs from surveillance outside Le Signador. One showed a man entering through the rear door late the previous night, tall, narrow-shouldered, wearing a cap. His face turned just enough to show the profile. Wolfe turned the photo to De Soto. Does this look familiar? De Soto's breath caught. Yes, he whispered. Philippe, but older. Wolfe gave a satisfied nod. Saul located him this afternoon, now running a small bistro in Queens under the name Vincent Hale. He will be taken into custody before dawn. The recipe, I suspect, will be found there, half charred or reimagined. Lydia exhaled shakily. Henry muttered a curse, and De Soto dropped his head into his hands. When they'd gone, Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. An old flame indeed, he murmured. A pity. The passion that fuels genius too easily ignites folly. I looked at him. So that's it? Justice served. I opened one eye. Justice, Mr. Goodwin, is a dish best prepared cold, but only if the kitchen is clean afterward. He reached for his beer. Now, tell Fritz the case is over. He may season freely again. Dinner that night was duck with saffron risotto, served in dignified silence. As always, Wolfe ate, like a man paying tribute to civilization itself. When he finally spoke, it was softly, as though to himself. Men who play with fire, he said, always believe they can control the heat. But memory, Archie, memory cooks at its own temperature. I raised my glass. Here's to keeping the kitchen cool. He grunted, which from Wolfe was approval enough. The next morning began with the kind of silence that only a solved case can bring to the brownstone. It was the rare, delicate calm that Wolfe treated as sacred, like the stillness after a storm he had deliberately summoned. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when Fritz brought in the morning mail on a silver tray, a ritual that carried all the ceremony of a royal decree. He placed it before Wolfe, who was already ensconced in his chair, dressed in a mustard-colored robe that made him look like a very well-fed emperor at peace with his empire. He leafed through the envelopes with the practiced disinterest of a man who considered 90% of the world's communication an intrusion. Bills, advertisements, invitations to mediocrity, he muttered, setting each aside. Then he paused. He turned one envelope over, studied the handwriting, and slit it open with the paper knife. The moment his eyes met the contents, his expression tightened by one imperceptible degree. I'd seen that look before. It meant something unpleasant had slipped through his defenses. He read it twice, then folded the letter neatly and placed it on the desk. "Archie," he said, his tone even but sharp at the edges, "you will read this." I took it and skimmed the page. The handwriting was slanted, almost elegant, and the words were few. "A chef's fire never dies. You caught the hand, not the mind. The recipe still burns where you can't see it. The flame remembers." No signature, but the scent, faint but distinct, rose off the paper. Burnt saffron again. I whistled. So Philippe, or Vincent Hale, or whoever he's calling himself, is still stirring the pot. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "He is in custody as of dawn. Saul confirmed it an hour ago. He could not have sent this." "Then he's got a partner," I said. "Someone close enough to know what happened here last night." "Or someone who was here," Wolfe said softly. That hit home. I ran the mental list. De Soto, Lydia, Henry. All three had been in this room less than 12 hours ago. Any of them could have slipped an envelope through the mail slot before leaving. "You think one of them's keeping the fire alive?" I said. Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It is possible. Our friend Philippe may have been the instrument, not the composer. The language of this note suggests intellect, intention. The tone is theatrical but controlled." "Which rules out Henri," I said. "The man thinks subtlety is what happens when you use a smaller frying pan." "Indeed," Wolfe said dryly. "That leaves Miss Crane, whose restraint masks calculation, or Mr. De Soto, whose pride could ferment into delusion." "De Soto's already cracked once," I said. "You saw him last night. If this is his way of saving face, it's a weird one." "Not if his humiliation required a narrative," Wolfe said. "Some men cannot abide being merely victims. They must rewrite their own disgrace into myth. The line, 'The flame remembers,' he may now see himself as the flame." I stared at him. "So you think De Soto might have orchestrated the whole thing, using Philippe, then letting him take the fall?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that the story is incomplete, and incompleteness irritates me." He rang for Fritz. "Please inform Mr. Goodwin when breakfast is ready. He will accompany me only after I have finished my eggs. I intend to make a call." That was Wolfe's version of going to war. After breakfast, he had Saul bring De Soto to the brownstone again. The man arrived, looking hollowed out, the shadows under his eyes darker, his movements sharp and jerky. He held himself like a man made of wire, bent but not broken. "Mr. Wolfe," he began as soon as he sat. "I don't understand what's happening. The police said they found some of my old notes in Filippe's place. Proof enough, they claim. But then, this morning, I get a call from one of my investors. They received an anonymous package, a copy of the Cena sauce recipe, with my signature forged at the bottom." Wolfe's brow creased. "The copy matched your original?" "Yes, exactly. Down to the measurements, except for one thing. The final ingredient was changed. Instead of saffron, it listed paprika." "Paprika," Wolfe murmured. "A deliberate degradation. The act of imitation, not replication. A taunt." "Exactly," De Soto said. "Who would do such a thing? Felipe's in jail, but someone's still trying to ruin me." I exchanged a look with Wolfe. He caught it, and I could tell his mind was moving fast behind those heavy-lidded eyes. "You received no other threats?" "No. Only that note from before, and now this." Wolfe nodded once. "Then, Mr. De Soto, you will return to your restaurant and conduct business as usual. Inform no one of our discussion. Should you receive another message, written, verbal, or culinary, you will bring it to me at once." De Soto looked bewildered. "That's it?" "For now," Wolfe said. "You may consider yourself under observation." When he left, I leaned against the desk. "You believe him?" "Belief," Wolfe said, "is the enemy of deduction, but I am persuaded he tells the truth about the new note. What he does not realize is that its author seeks more than his ruin. They seek continuation." "Continuation?" "Precisely. The message was not to him. It was to me." He tapped the letter on his desk. "They are challenging intellect with intellect. The first flame was vengeance. This is legacy." "Meaning someone wants credit for the creation?" "Or control over its memory," Wolfe said. "To redefine who owns genius, that is why we must determine who benefits most from De Soto's fall." It didn't take long to narrow it down. Lydia Crane had already stepped into the power vacuum. That afternoon, Saul reported she'd been fielding calls from investors, assuring them the restaurant would continue under her management should unforeseen difficulties arise. When I told Wolfe, his eyes gleamed faintly. As I expected, Miss Crane sees stability as an inheritance, and her association with Philippe or Vincent Hale may have extended beyond mere correspondence. Her efficiency is her alibi. "So what's next?" I asked. "Next," Wolfe said, "we set the table again. Invite Miss Crane here this evening. Alone." When Lydia arrived, she was polished to perfection. Charcoal dress, hair pulled back, eyes cool. I escorted her in and took my post. "Miss Crane," Wolfe began, "you have managed Mr. De Soto's affairs for years. You possess both intelligence and discipline, yet both qualities can be corrupted by ambition." She smiled faintly. "Is that an accusation or a compliment?" "An observation," Wolfe said. "You arranged the schedules, knew the locks, the routines, the accounts. You corresponded with a supposed supplier who was, in fact, a fugitive chef. Did you also arrange his introduction to De Soto?" Her lips curved slightly. "I didn't have to. Philippe was already watching. I only opened the door wider." De Soto had been right about one thing. Someone close had betrayed him. "You assisted him," Wolfe said. "You helped him steal the recipe." "Yes," she said, calm as a marble statue. "At first it was business. Philippe promised he wouldn't expose it, just replicate it to prove Lucien's hypocrisy. But he wanted revenge, and Lucien deserved it. He took Philippe's ideas years ago, ruined his name, and built an empire on the ashes. I thought exposing him might balance things." "But you went further," Wolfe said. "The forged recipe, the new notes, you are perpetuating the legend." She nodded once. "Because Philippe's gone now, and someone needs to finish what he started. The flame deserves to burn." Wolfe sighed, not out of fatigue but disappointment. "You mistake destruction for justice, Mr. Goodwin, if you will." I picked up the phone and called Saul, who was waiting outside. Lydia didn't resist when he entered. She simply rose, smoothed her dress, and looked at Wolfe. "You of all people should understand obsession," she said. "You live in it." He met her gaze without blinking. "Obsession," he said, "is harmless until it demands a witness. Then it becomes tyranny." When the door closed behind her, Wolfe leaned back and exhaled heavily. "A woman of intellect and vanity," he said. "A dangerous combination she could not create, so she chose to curate vengeance instead." "That's one word for it," I said. "I'd call it a slow roast with bad seasoning." He grunted, which meant approval. "Mr. De Soto will recover. His reputation may survive, though his illusions will not." "And you?" I asked. "Satisfied?" He stared into his glass of beer. "Satisfaction is for the gluttonous, Archie. I prefer accuracy." That night, as Fritz served the saffron risotto again, untouched, pure and untarnished, Wolfe lifted his fork and murmured, "A recipe, like truth, can be imitated, but never replaced." And somewhere in that quiet kitchen, the last echo of the flame finally went out. For the next 2 days, the brownstone was uncharacteristically subdued. Wolfe retreated into his orchids, that silent kingdom of symmetry and patience where no human folly could intrude. He was in there for hours at a time, leaving only for meals and the occasional comment that served as both observation and reprimand. I had the impression that he was satisfied, but in a Wolfe sort of way, meaning only that the case was no longer intruding on his digestion. For my part, I wasn't convinced it was over. The thing about Wolfe's investigations is that when he says the case is concluded, he means the logic has reached its destination, not necessarily the story. And I had a feeling this particular story wasn't done simmering. It was Thursday afternoon when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting Saul or maybe Kramer calling to gloat about how we'd outdone the NYPD again. Instead, a voice I recognized but hadn't expected filled my ear. De Soto's, tense and low. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe, immediately. Something's happened." "Something, as in what?" I can't explain over the phone, but it's bad. Please, he'll understand." There was a tremor in his voice that didn't belong to a man merely inconvenienced. I looked toward the plant room door, where I could see the faint outline of Wolfe through the frosted glass. "All right," I said. "Give us an hour." When I hung up, Wolfe was already emerging, towel in hand, his face flushed from the tropical heat of the orchids. "Who was that?" "De Soto. Sounds like his nerves are cooked again. He says something's happened." "Pui," Wolfe grunted, sitting down heavily. "That man's capacity for calamity rivals his capacity for culinary inflation. What is it now, another note?" "Could be," he wouldn't say. "Very well. Admit him when he arrives. I will see whether misfortune has learned restraint." De Soto showed up 40 minutes later, pale, disheveled, and smelling faintly of smoke. The combination did not please Wolfe. "You reek," he said without preamble. "Explain yourself before you contaminate my air further." De Soto's hands trembled as he sank into a chair. "There's been a fire," he said hoarsely. "At Le Signador, the kitchen, everything's gone." That cut through even Wolfe's reserve. He sat up straighter. "Gone?" "Completely. It started around 3 this morning. The night porter escaped, but the rest, it spread too fast. The police say it looks accidental, but I know better." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "You think Lydia did it?" "She's in custody," he said. "They arrested her yesterday. There's no way, but someone else. Someone who knew." Wolfe's brow furrowed deeply. "You are certain the fire was deliberate?" "Yes, because of this." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal tin, scorched black on one side. When he opened it, a smell of burnt spice and oil hit the room. Inside was a clump of ash, fused paper, and something faintly golden, Saffron, Wolfe murmured. Of course. It was left in my mailbox this morning, De Soto said. No note, just that. Whoever did this, whoever burned the restaurant, wanted me to know they were still watching. I couldn't help it. I muttered, guess the flame remembers. Wolfe shot me a look that could have stripped paint. You are not incorrect, but refrain from vulgar dramatics. He turned his attention back to De Soto. Describe the sequence of events. I closed the restaurant last night. I'd been working on an alternative menu, something new to keep the investors interested. Around 10, I left. The fire broke out hours later. The porter swears he smelled something, spice like saffron, just before the smoke started. Where were you? Wolfe asked. At home. I live alone. No witnesses. Convenient, Wolfe said dryly. Still, this action, if deliberate, is no longer vengeance. It is erasure. He turned to me. Archie, you will go to the site. Speak to the fire inspector. Photograph what remains, especially the kitchen. Sure, I said, grabbing my coat. Want me to bring back a souvenir? If you find one that does not offend reason, he said, closing his eyes. Now go. I will speak with Mr. De Soto further. When I got to Le Signor door, it was a blackened shell of itself. The smell of smoke hung heavy, and firefighters were still rolling up hoses. The windows were shattered, the walls streaked with soot, the roof peeled open like a scorched lid. I found the inspector, a short man with eyes like burnt coal. Accidental, you think? I asked. Hard to say, he said. Started near the prep station. Could have been electrical, but there's residue, oil mixed with something else. Unusual smell. Saffron? He blinked. You know your spices. Yeah, weird choice for an accelerant. I moved through the wreckage, stepping over charred debris. The office was mostly gone, but one corner of the desk had survived, half buried under plaster. On it, a scrap of metal had fused to the surface. I brushed away the soot and saw the faint outline of a nameplate. Philippe Morel. That made me stop cold. Philippe's name had never been on that desk. Not during the investigation, not before. Someone had planted it there afterward, as if to leave a final signature. I pocketed the plate and headed back. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was still with De Soto, but the conversation had shifted from explanation to philosophy. Mr. De Soto, Wolfe was saying, you have lived your life as though creation excused cruelty. That conceit has now met its reflection. De Soto's voice cracked. You think this was meant for me? It was tailored for you, Wolfe said. The saffron, the symbolism, the fire, all acts of theater composed for one spectator. I set the nameplate on the desk. Wolfe studied it, his mouth tightening. This was left at the scene, I said. Of course, Wolfe murmured. He, or she, intended the signature. De Soto looked bewildered. But Philippe's dead, or in jail. Not dead, Wolfe said, and perhaps not in jail. Saul must verify this at once. He glanced toward me. Call him. Saul answered within minutes, efficient as ever. Wolfe, he said, Philippe, or Hale, whatever name you prefer, was transferred early this morning for questioning. But there's a hitch. What kind of hitch? The van never arrived. Somewhere between the courthouse and the holding facility, it disappeared. The driver was found unconscious. No sign of the prisoner. I could almost hear Wolfe's breathing slow as his mind processed it. So the flame walks again. Looks that way, Saul said. Want me to start tracing? Immediately, Wolfe said, and hung up. De Soto sank back in his chair, looking like a man who'd just been told his reflection could kill him. You mean he escaped? That he did this? Wolfe's eyes were distant. I mean that your adversary is not finished. His vengeance is not the crude act of an arsonist. It is orchestration, and his return to fire is both signature and declaration. He rose then, slowly, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of shouting. "Archie, have Fritz prepare coffee. Mr. De Soto will remain here until further notice. The city may yet burn, but it shall not do so without my observation." De Soto tried to protest, but Wolfe silenced him with a gesture. "You brought the flame into this house, sir. Now you will stay until it is extinguished." That night, the brownstone felt heavier than usual. Fritz brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and Wolfe sat motionless for hours, eyes fixed on the dark window as if expecting the glow of fire on the horizon. I stayed up too, the atmosphere thick with waiting. Sometime after midnight, there came a soft knock on the front door. 3 slow taps, deliberate, familiar. I went to answer, but Wolfe's voice stopped me cold. "Archie," he said, low and certain, "do not open it." There was a pause, another tap, and then a faint voice. A whisper, but clear enough to chill the blood. "Tell Mr. Wolfe," it said, "that the flame remembers him too." The silence that followed was long, absolute, and in that moment I realized something that made the back of my neck prickle. For the first time since I'd known him, Nero Wolfe looked genuinely afraid. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The sound of those words still hung in the air like smoke that hadn't found its way out. Wolfe didn't speak, didn't even breathe audibly. His eyes had fixed on the door with the same expression I'd once seen when a black widow had wandered onto his desk. Except this time, the threat wasn't small or venomous. It was personal. "Archie," he said finally, his voice low, controlled but heavy, "lock it, then extinguish the light in the front hall." I did as told, sliding the bolt and flipping the switch. The room dimmed to a warm glow from the desk lamp, shadows stretching like question marks across the walls. The street outside was quiet, but there was a sense, palpable, electric, that someone was still out there, watching. Wolfe leaned back, his fingers steepled, though not in contemplation this time. It was more like a defensive posture, as if even his intellect had pulled its shield up. He would not dare approach here without purpose, he said, more to himself than to me. I kept my voice steady. "He? You're sure it was Philippe?" His eyelids flickered. Who else would address me thus? The phrasing is consistent, the theatrical symmetry, the invocation of memory. He is not merely communicating vengeance. He is asserting parity. "You mean he thinks he's your equal?" Wolfe's gaze lifted to mine, and for once, there was no sarcasm. "He thinks he is my reflection." Outside, a car passed, its tires whispering against wet asphalt. The sound faded, and all that remained was the tick of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Fritz was asleep upstairs. De Soto had taken refuge in the guest room, his nerves fried. If Philippe, or whoever was playing his part, was out there, he had already done the impossible, brought the fight to Wolfe's doorstep. "What now?" I asked quietly. "Now," Wolfe said, rising, slowly but with purpose. "We cease reacting. We regain control." That might sound like a declaration, but when Wolfe says it, it's a law. He motioned for me to follow him to the kitchen, and I did, though my instincts weren't fond of moving away from the locked door when there was a pyromaniac possibly lurking outside. Fritz's immaculate domain was dark, except for the faint gleam from the stove light. Wolfe reached for one of the copper pots, running a finger along its polished rim, and then turned back to me. "Fire is a paradox," he said. "It consumes, yet it reveals. Our adversary understands that. He burns away the superfluous, leaving only the message." "You said he whispered those words distinctly?" "Yes, calmly, like he wanted us to hear him clearly." "Then he will not strike tonight," Wolfe said. "He has made his gesture, a challenge. He wants observation. Tomorrow he will move where the audience is larger." I frowned. "Meaning the public?" "Precisely." That gave me the unpleasant image of a packed restaurant, or worse, a crowd, being turned into the next act of his performance. Wolfe must have read the thought in my face, because his expression darkened. "You will go to the police first thing," he said. "Lieutenant Kramer, specifically. Tell him the escaped man has made contact and intends another act. He will scoff naturally, but he will listen. After that, Saul will follow every channel through which Philippe, or his accomplice, could act." "And me?" "You," Wolfe said, "will remain visible. He expects confrontation from me, not from you. Therefore, you will bait him." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to be the lure?" "Your flair for self-preservation will suffice as protection," he said dryly. "Announce that you are overseeing the restoration of Le Signe d'Or for De Soto's investors. Spread it liberally. Our flame will not resist returning to the scene of his art." That was Wolfe's genius. He never chased. He made the world come to him, even its most dangerous corners. By morning, the plan was in motion. Kramer came in grumbling, his overcoat dripping from the rain, looking as if someone had insulted his breakfast. Wolfe told him everything. About Philippe's disappearance, the note, the fire, and the voice at the door. Kramer, predictably, snorted. "You expect me to put out an alert for a whisper in the dark?" he said. "Your imagination's getting theatrical, Wolfe." "I do not imagine," Wolfe replied coldly. "I deduce. If you prefer to wait until he makes a public spectacle of his malice, then do so, but do not expect me to mop your mess." Kramer's jaw tightened. "Fine. I'll keep my men on him. But if this turns out to be one of your dramatic coincidences..." Wolfe waved him off. "Out, Lieutenant. You weary me." When Kramer left, Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, you will begin your masquerade. Fritz will prepare your luncheon early." "I'll alert the press by dessert," I said. "You sure he'll bite?" "He will not resist temptation," Wolfe said. "Theatrics require spectators." By noon, I dropped the rumor in every ear that mattered. 2 reporters, a rival restaurateur, and 1 overly chatty maitre d'. By evening, the word had made its way to the city's gossip column. Le Signe d'Or to rise again, Chef De Soto's phoenix of flavors. I couldn't have written a better invitation for a man obsessed with symbolism. It worked faster than I expected. Around 9, a message came by hand, a single envelope delivered to the Brownstones' front gate. Fritz found it and brought it in, holding it between thumb and forefinger as if it might ignite. Wolfe slit it open and read aloud, "You invite rebirth, but forget the ash. Tomorrow at dusk, where the flame first fell, the truth will serve itself." He looked at me, his eyes bright with an energy I rarely saw. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "Our pyromaniac intends his finale." The next day, I positioned myself across from the ruins of Le Signe d'Or just before sunset. The site was still cordoned off, the smell of burnt spice and plaster hanging in the damp air. I stood with a borrowed clipboard, pretending to take notes while scanning the street. At first, nothing. Then, movement. A tall man in a grey coat, moving with the careful slowness of someone who wants to be noticed just enough. His face was lean, scarred near the jaw, but it was the eyes that confirmed it. Philippe, or what was left of him. He saw me, smiled. "Mr. Goodwin," he said calmly, "how pleasant to see the messenger again." "Pleasant isn't the word I'd use," I said. "You've made quite an impression lately." He chuckled softly. "You misunderstand me. I don't destroy for pleasure. I recreate through destruction. Fire, after all, reveals essence." "Yeah? Well, you're about to reveal yours to the nearest patrol car if you don't start explaining." He stepped closer, and I caught it. The faint smell of burnt saffron, faint but deliberate, like his signature. "I came to say goodbye," he said. "To my art. To your master's illusion that reason can control creation." There was a click behind me, quiet but unmistakable. Saul's doing. He'd been waiting in the shadows, and now he stepped forward, gun drawn. Philippe froze, expression flickering between pride and resignation. "Don't flatter yourself," I said. "You're not a creator. You're just a man who doesn't know when to stop stirring the pot." Philippe smiled one last time, bitterly, almost sadly. "Then watch closely, Mr. Goodwin. Even a dying flame burns brightest before it fades." He reached into his coat, and for a split second I thought it was a weapon. But what he pulled out was stranger, a small vial of golden powder. He flung it to the ground. The air filled instantly with the sharp, heady scent of saffron. Then, as Saul grabbed him, Philippe whispered a single word: "Remember." It was over in moments. Saul had him pinned, the vial crushed underfoot, the air heavy with spice and smoke. I radioed Wolfe at once. When we brought Philippe in, Wolfe didn't look triumphant. He looked saddened. He watched the man carefully, as if studying a specimen that defied classification. "You could have been magnificent," Wolfe said quietly. "But you mistook vengeance for artistry." Philippe smiled weakly. "And you mistake control for truth." When they led him away, Wolfe turned to me. "There is no pleasure in a solved puzzle when the pieces are made of ash," he said. "But still, accuracy must prevail." That night, over dinner, he was uncharacteristically silent. Fritz had prepared something simple: poached eggs, bread, and coffee. When we finished, Wolfe set down his fork and said, almost to himself, "The flame may remember, Archie, but memory does not forgive." And for once, I didn't have a wisecrack ready, because somehow I knew this case had burned deeper than either of us cared to admit. The next morning, the brownstone felt as though it were holding its breath. Fritz moved about with a kind of solemn precision that only comes after one of Wolfe's heavy cases, the kind that leaves a residue in the air even after it's been closed. The orchids upstairs thrived in their steady light, oblivious to the fact that their keeper's thoughts were elsewhere. Wolfe himself sat at his desk, untouched breakfast in front of him, his eyes fixed on a blank sheet of paper. I'd seen him like that before, still as a statue, yet so alive with thought you could almost hear the hum of it. It usually meant one of two things. He was writing the post-mortem of a case, or he'd decided the story wasn't quite finished. When I came in with the morning paper, he didn't look up. "Archie," he said, "what is in the Gazette?" I set it down in front of him. The headline was impossible to miss. "The flame extinguished, chef pyromaniac confesses in custody." "Philippe's confession?" I said. "He gave it all to Kramer last night, took credit for the fire, the threats, the whole act, said he did it to restore purity to the art." Sounds like a man rehearsing his own eulogy. Wolfe's lip curled faintly, theatrical until the end. I sat across from him, watching his eyes scan the text. "So that's it, huh? Curtain down, credits roll?" He didn't answer immediately. "A confession is a statement of closure, Archie," he said finally. "But closure is often a human convenience. Logic, however, requires coherence, and coherence," he tapped the paper once, "is absent." I knew that tone. It meant the machinery inside his skull was winding back into motion. "You think something's off?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the breakfast tray as if the eggs had personally offended him. "Fritz," he called toward the kitchen, "this coffee is insipid." Fritz appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised in mild despair. "It is precisely as you prefer, Mr. Wolfe." "Then the world is to blame," Wolfe muttered, and returned to the paper. I took that as my cue to stay quiet. He reread the article twice, then reached for the phone and dialed Kramer's office. The conversation was short, and, from Wolfe's side, all ice. When he hung up, he looked at me. "Kramer's satisfied," he said. Too satisfied. The confession came too quickly, too neatly. Philippe claimed sole authorship of the fire, yet his phrasing, "We completed the circle," escaped the lieutenant's attention. "We?" I repeated. "So you think he had help again?" "I do not think," Wolfe said sharply. "I know. The question is, who remained to finish what Philippe began?" I frowned. "Lydia's in custody. The restaurant's gone. De Soto's half ruined. Unless Fritz has taken up arson as a hobby, I'd say our suspect list is empty." "Pooh." Wolfe waved a hand. "Our assumptions are as fragile as De Soto's ego. When a man like Philippe speaks of we, he does not mean collaboration of crime, but of conviction. Someone still shares his creed." "And you think they're still out there?" "Not out there," Wolfe said quietly. "Here." I stiffened. "You're saying someone's targeting you?" He met my gaze. "Archie, we were drawn into this not by chance, but by invitation. Every act, the note, the arson, the whisper, was choreographed with us as participants. Felipe's final word, 'remember,' was not directed at the police. It was addressed to me." "That's poetic," I said, "but you're not exactly a sentimental muse." "Sentiment is irrelevant," Wolfe replied. "Admiration, however, is not. Philippe's final performance was designed to outlive him. He wanted to test whether his philosophy could persist without his hand guiding it." I thought about that for a second. "So someone else is carrying the torch?" "Precisely." He stood, an event that, for Nero Wolfe, had the weight of prophecy, and crossed to the globe by the window. He turned it slowly, a habit he only indulged when a case had shifted from mystery to meditation. "Fire has been our motif," he said softly. "Yet fire leaves marks of continuity. Ash does not vanish. It settles. We must find where it has settled." That afternoon, I took the Packard down to the holding facility where Philippe was being kept, hoping to pick up a detail Wolfe couldn't extract through Kramer's bureaucracy. The guard recognized me immediately. Wolfe's name still had pull. "He's quiet," the guard said as he led me through the corridor. "Won't talk to anyone since the confession. Just sits there writing, pages and pages." "Writing what?" "Recipes, maybe. Hard to tell." He let me into the observation room. Philippe sat at the table, hands cuffed, a stack of paper in front of him. He was scribbling with a kind of manic serenity, the pen moving fast but precise. I waited until he looked up. "Mr. Goodwin," he said softly, as if greeting an old friend, "does the great man send you to taste the aftermath?" "Something like that. Wolfe thinks you're not finished." Philippe smiled faintly. "He's right, of course. Genius never finishes. It transitions. Tell him that." "What's in the notes?" "Legacy," he said. "Every dish is a story, every story a confession. Mine must be perfected before I pass it on." "Pass it on to who?" He tilted his head, eyes bright. "To the one who still remembers the flame. You'll know soon enough." Before I could press further, the guard signaled time. Philippe turned back to his papers, dismissing me without another word. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with the patience of a loaded cannon. "Well?" he asked. "He's writing something. Recipes, he says, but they read like scripture to him. He claims he's leaving a legacy." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured, "and he will leave it where it can be found. The question is, by whom?" We didn't have to wait long for the answer. That evening, Fritz brought in another envelope. Plain, unmarked. Wolfe opened it and unfolded a single sheet of paper. On it, written in Philippe's distinct, elegant hand, was a single line. "The disciple tends the flame." Beneath it was a name, Lucien de Soto. I let out a low whistle. Our chefs decided to play prophet from behind bars. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Or his disciple has already begun to act. We summoned Saul, who was never far when Wolfe's instincts turned ominous. He confirmed within the hour that De Soto had left his apartment 2 hours earlier and hadn't returned. His car was still parked outside, but his coat and briefcase were missing. "He's vanished," Saul said over the phone. "I'll keep looking, but it's like he walked off the map." Wolfe sat motionless for a long time. Finally, he said, "No man truly disappears, Archie. He simply relocates his purpose." That night, sleep was off the menu for all of us. Wolfe sat in his chair until dawn, eyes closed, mind alive. When the first light seeped through the curtains, he finally spoke. "Archie, the next move will not be destruction, it will be resurrection." Meaning. Meaning De Soto intends to rebuild, not a restaurant, but a myth. And in doing so, he will finish what Philippe began. The flame was never his enemy. It was his inheritance. He opened his eyes, sharp and heavy with realization. "We are not done, Archie. The fire will rise again." And though the morning was calm and the air outside clean, I could swear I smelled it, the faint trace of saffron drifting through the brownstone, like a warning from the ashes. When morning broke over the brownstone, it didn't so much arrive as intrude, gray light pressing through the curtains, carrying the damp smell of overnight rain. Fritz moved quietly in the kitchen, trying not to disturb Wolfe's concentration. The orchids upstairs were tended and silent, as if even they sensed the house was waiting for the final word. Wolfe hadn't slept. He'd spent the long hours in the chair of his thinking, eyes half closed, mind open like a net stretched wide across the sea. When I came in, he was already halfway through his first bottle of beer, breakfast untouched. "Archie," he said without turning his head, "has Saul reported?" "Not yet," I said. "But Lon Cohen called. The Gazette is running a follow-up this afternoon. They think De Soto's disappearance means a breakdown. Police are keeping an eye out." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "The man is not unwell. He is completing a ritual." "Then we're letting a ritualist loose in the city. You think he's planning another fire?" "No," Wolfe said, his tone suddenly sharp. "Not destruction, transformation. Felipe's fire burned the material. De Soto's will seek to reclaim the idea. He believes himself the inheritor of purity." I frowned. "You're saying he's going to resurrect the source?" "Precisely," Wolfe said. "In secret, to prove that creation transcends corruption. A fool's act, but a dangerous one. He will not risk humiliation again by failing publicly. Therefore, he will stage his resurrection in private and send the announcement to the one witness whose recognition would sanctify it." I didn't need him to finish. "You?" he nodded. "Me." At that moment, the phone rang. Fritz appeared in the doorway, face pale. "It is Mr. De Soto," he said softly. I reached the receiver first. "De Soto?" His voice came thin, almost reverent. "Mr. Goodwin, tell Mr. Wolfe I've done it. The scene sauce is reborn. Tonight he must come. He must taste it. Only him." "Where are you?" "The old wine cellar beneath the restaurant. What's left of it. Midnight. Tell him the flame lives." The line went dead. Wolfe's face didn't move. "Predictable," he said. "The final supper of a deluded man. You're not actually thinking of going." He looked at me steadily. "No, you are." I didn't argue. There's no point when Wolfe has already played out the whole board. But I didn't like it. Midnight in a burnt-out cellar with a chef who'd lost half his sanity and 3/4 of his fortune sounded like a fine way to test the limits of human luck. When the time came, Saul and I arrived early, slipping past the police barricade. The ruins of Le Signe d'Or loomed like a skeleton against the wet skyline. Beneath it, the old cellar still stood, stone walls scorched but intact. A faint light flickered through the cracks. A candle's glow. De Soto was there, seated at a makeshift table, his white coat smudged with soot and pride. Before him, a single copper pan simmered over a portable burner. The air carried that unmistakable scent. Saffron, butter, something floral beneath it. "You came," he said softly when he saw me. "Good. He'll come too." I shook my head. "Wolfe doesn't take midnight excursions. You know that." "Then you'll bring it to him," he said. "Taste it. Tell him the flame endures." He stirred the pan, his movements tender, almost devout. "Do you know what Philippe never understood, Mr. Goodwin? Fire is not destruction. It's purification. The recipe was never about flavor. It was about control. You tame the heat, you own the truth." I kept my hand near my jacket pocket where the revolver rested. "And burning your own restaurant was control too." His eyes flared, but not with anger, with conviction. "That was his doing, Philippe's, but he left me the revelation. Now I finish what he began." Before I could speak, Saul's shadow appeared behind him, silent as breath. He caught my signal and moved forward. "Lucien de Soto," he said quietly. "You're done cooking." De Soto didn't flinch. He lifted the pan and poured a small spoonful of the sauce into a cup. The smell was intoxicating, rich, golden, alive. He extended it toward me. "Taste it," he whispered. "For Wolfe." I shook my head. Not a chance. "Then he must." His tone cracked for the first time. "He must, because it's perfection. The final version. Whatever came next drowned in the noise of Saul's footsteps closing in. De Soto turned sharply, stumbled, and the pan toppled. The flame beneath it caught the spilled sauce, flaring high, saffron smoke curling toward the ceiling. In seconds, the heat was everywhere. We dragged him out before it could spread, Saul cursing, me coughing on smoke. Outside, the night air cut cold through the adrenaline. Fire trucks were already in the distance. Someone had seen the light. De Soto collapsed on the pavement, clutching the ladle like a relic. "It's perfect," he muttered, staring into nothing. "He'll understand." By the time the medics took him, the cellar was gone. When I got back to the brownstone at dawn, Wolfe was waiting. I didn't have to explain. The smoke on my coat said enough. "He burned it," Wolfe said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. Tried to take himself with it this time. He said the sauce was perfect. Wanted you to taste it." Wolfe's eyes closed briefly. Perfection is the final refuge of the desperate. Once achieved, there is nothing left but oblivion. He rose, crossed to the window and stood there a long time. The morning light caught the edges of his face. Sharp, austere, weary. "He mistook creation for divinity," he said finally. "He sought to command the flame rather than understand it. And in doing so, he proved what Philippe only claimed." "What's that?" I asked. "That genius without restraint is merely combustion." I let that sit. Fritz entered quietly with fresh coffee, and Wolfe, after a moment's hesitation, accepted it. He took a sip, sighed, and settled back into his chair, the weight of the case finally sliding off him like smoke from a cooling pan. "So," I said, "that's that. The fire's out, the sauce is gone, and the city can eat in peace." "For a time," Wolfe said. "But appetite, Archie. Appetite never sleeps. Someone, somewhere, will again mistake it for art." He closed his eyes, and the room filled with the small, steady sound of him breathing, peaceful, deliberate, alive. Outside, the first streak of sun broke through the clouds, pale and clean. I poured myself coffee and sat opposite him, watching the day begin. "You know," I said after a while, "for a man who doesn't move much, you leave a lot of scorch marks." His eyes opened just enough to meet mine. "I, Archie," he said, "merely observe the flame. It is others who insist on playing with it." And that was the end of it. Dinner that night was simple. Fritz's risotto, fragrant with saffron, perfectly balanced. Wolfe ate slowly, silently, as though tasting not the food, but the lesson. When he was done, he laid his napkin on the table and said, in that quiet tone that could fill a cathedral, "The mind, like the palate, must learn discretion, otherwise it devours itself." Then he leaned back, reached for his beer, and the world, finally, was still again. That concludes Nero Wolfe and the Chef's Secret Recipe, a full-circle mystery of creation, obsession, and the thin line between genius and ruin, resolved not with drama, but with Wolfe's unshakable logic and moral clarity, 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 and moral clarity.